Sis blamed me for her divorce. Family left. Years later, email proved it. I ruined her. My family turned their backs on me because my sister, Hannah, pointed the finger at me for wrecking her marriage. That was years ago, but then out of the blue, I got an email that laid it all out with proof, and I used it to turn her world upside down. Let me take you back to when this mess started, almost 7 years ago. My folks kicked me out of their lives and the house I grew up in. I was 29 now, but back then I was just 22, barely scraping by with no money to get my own place. It hit me like a freight train. No warning, no time to get my head straight or my wallet ready. And it all came down to Hannah. She's 37 now, and we've never been tight, probably because of the big age difference. She tied the knot with her guy, Pete, who's 39, after dating him for 3 years. She was 27 when they got hitched, and their marriage lasted 3 years before it fell apart. Hannah swore up and down that Pete cheated on her with a friend of mine, and that's where everything went south. After college, I was still crashing at my parents' place, working my first job and trying to stack some cash before moving out. They were cool with me staying there, until Hannah's divorce blew up. One day, she stormed back home, tears streaming, screaming that she'd filed for divorce because Pete had been stepping out on her for 6 months. Then she dragged me into it, saying I set Pete up with my friend. That friend was Emily, 28 now, who'd been trying to put on some weight. Pete's a dietitian, so I hooked them up for some advice, nothing more. But Hannah claimed Emily was the one Pete was messing around with. I couldn't believe it. Emily and I weren't super close, but I knew she wasn't the type to mess with a married guy. And Pete? He was head over heels for Hannah, always singing her praises. Cheating just didn't fit him. I had my doubts, but my parents swallowed Hannah's story whole, no questions asked, even though she didn't have a shred of proof. I get it, they'd pick their daughter over their son-in-law any day, but what got me was how fast they booted me out just because she said so. She barged in one day, throwing a fit, and somehow talked my folks into tossing me out, all because I'd introduced Emily to Pete. Hannah said I ruined her marriage, and for some reason, my parents bought it. I was crushed, begging them to hear me out, but they wouldn't budge. They told me to get out, or they'd make me leave. In one day, I lost my family and my home, standing there on the street with no clue where to turn. I ended up crying on the sidewalk with all my stuff for about an hour before I pulled myself together and crashed at a buddy's place for the night. I called my folks every day after that, trying to fix things, but they wouldn't pick up. My friend let me stay with him until I could figure out a place of my own, but my parents had already decided I was the bad guy, the one who broke up Hannah's marriage. They even said they were ashamed of me before showing me the door, which didn't even make sense since I wasn't the one Pete supposedly cheated with. They blocked my number, so I couldn't reach them, and when I showed up at the house, my mom threatened to call the cops if I didn't leave. That's when it hit me. They really meant it. They blamed me for everything that went down. I reckon I shouldn't have been shocked that my folks took Hannah's side so quick, seeing as she'd always been their golden girl. They never really wanted a second kid, so I was kind of an afterthought growing up. I didn't mind it much as a kid, but I never figured it'd blow up into something this big. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming, but honestly, who could have guessed it'd turn out like this? For the next few weeks, I tried piecing it all together on my own since Hannah and my parents had shut me out completely. I had no way to reach them. Pete wouldn't talk to me either. He'd cut me off too, which threw me for a loop. I couldn't track him down because he and Hannah had cleared out of their old place and gone to stay with their own folks. With nobody to turn to, I figured my only shot at the truth was Emily. Now, Emily and I weren't real tight, but I didn't have much choice. So, I reached out and asked her to meet up. I laid it all out for her, what Hannah had said, and asked if there was any truth to this affair business. She shot it down hard, saying it was all nonsense, and I bought her story. She told me she'd only met Pete a handful of times, strictly for diet stuff, and there was nothing shady going on. She couldn't figure out why Hannah would pin something so rotten on her. Emily even mentioned she'd been with her boyfriend for a couple years and was gearing up to get married soon. She showed me some pictures, and her version sounded a whole lot truer than Hannah's. I didn't have hard evidence, but deep down, I knew Hannah was feeding us a load of bull about why her marriage tanked. Without proof, though, I couldn't march back to my family and set things right. Not that they'd have listened anyway. Back then, I was desperate to patch things up with my folks. I missed them something fierce, even after they'd done me dirty like that. But as time rolled on, I had to let it go and keep living. I found a little place to rent, threw myself into my job to keep my mind busy and focused on paying the bills. It beat sitting around feeling sorry for myself, especially since I didn't have any other options. It hurt like hell, but I knew I had to push forward, whether my family was in my corner or not. Years went by, and things started looking up. I traded that cramped apartment for a bigger one and got engaged to my girlfriend, Liza. She's 30 now, after 2 years together. About a week ago, we posted about our engagement, and that's when everything flipped upside down again. A few days later, this random email landed in my inbox, spilling the whole story of Hannah's divorce with proof attached, answering every question I've been carrying around for years. Liza usually sticks to posting about us on Instagram, but this time our engagement picture made it to her Facebook page too, where more folks could see it. She left it public, and it got a lot of eyes, including Pete's, my old brother-in-law. Turns out, Liza had met him at some doctor seminar a while back. She's a doctor herself, and they connected on Facebook. That's how he tracked me down. It's funny how small the world can feel sometimes, and for once I was glad it worked out that way. Pete didn't message me on social media, though. Instead, he sent this anonymous email a few days after our post went up. Later, he told me he kept it hush-hush because it had been so long since the divorce, and he didn't want to look like some guy still hung up on the past. Plus, he blocked me way back so reaching out felt awkward for him. When I opened that email, I couldn't believe what I was reading. It had the real deal on what went down 7 years ago, with proof that turned everything I thought I knew inside out. Here's the next part of your story, reworked according to your instructions. Written in first person as a simple American man, no emojis or abbreviations, less than 60% similar to the original, keeping all details, corrected for errors, and formatted for AI voiceover narration. I'm continuing from where the last part ended. So, here's the bombshell from that email. Anna had been the one stepping out on Pete, not the other way around like she'd been preaching to us all this time. That was a lie big enough to choke on, but it gets wilder. She'd been fooling around with one of my buddies, just like she'd pinned on Pete. That buddy was Frank, 28 now, who worked as a cashier at the grocery store near her old place back then. I'd never have put two and two together since I hadn't once seen them in the same room. They must have kept it real quiet, but not quiet enough to slip past Pete. When he caught her, Hannah spun it back on me, telling him I'd hooked her up with Frank because he was chasing a singing dream and she had a decent voice herself. She said I'd pushed her to help him out, and next thing you know, they were head over heels. She even claimed I was in on the whole thing, helping them keep it under wraps. That was pure garbage. I didn't have a clue Frank and Hannah were tangled up like that. Pete was furious when he found out, and he cut off my whole family. Something he says now was a dumb move, but he was too mad to think straight back then. He told me that face-to-face later because the email was meant to stay low-key. He didn't want anyone tracing it back to him, but I sniffed it out anyway. The proof he sent was solid. Screenshots of emails between Hannah and Frank, bragging about how easy it was to pull the wool over Pete's eyes, spilling their love for each other, and plotting their next meetups. She couldn't wiggle out of it. Her middle name was on those emails, something not many folks know about. I had her nailed cold. I pieced together it was Pete who sent it after digging through Liza's Facebook friends. My gut told me this tied back to that engagement post, and sure enough, I found him on her list. I reached out, and we set up a meet a few days back. That's when he spilled how he'd learned the truth Hannah fed our family. Turns out, he got it from Emily a couple years ago. They'd bumped into each other, and she'd asked him about the divorce. They got to chatting, and he found out what Hannah had told us. I'd asked Emily way back to keep my take on things hush-hush, and I was kicking myself for that now. If I hadn't, she might have clued Pete in sooner, and I could have cleared my name ages ago. Pete admitted he'd want to set me straight back then, but held off because it felt strange after so long. Man, if he wasn't so shy about stuff, my life might have been a whole lot smoother. I let it slide, though, because I needed him on my side to take Hannah down, and I knew he'd be game. She'd been feeding my folks a pack of lies to keep their money flowing her way during the divorce, and she'd throw me to the wolves to make sure I wouldn't dig up the real story. I couldn't fathom how someone, my own sister, no less, could be that low-down selfish. She never bothered correcting her tale, and my parents just ate up every word she dished out. Hannah knew if they found out she was the one cheating, she'd be toast with them, and she wasn't about to roll those dice. Too bad for her. The truth was out now, and I was ready to use it to flip her life upside down, just like she'd done to mine years back. I wasn't sure if my folks still live in the old house since I hadn't been around in 7 years, but I got lucky. They hadn't budged. I checked with a neighbor I used to know before heading over, and he told me Hannah was still crashing there too. That didn't shock me one bit. She's always been lazy as all get out, hating to lift a finger. If she could stay with our folks and let them handle everything, you bet she'd take it. Anyway, 2 days ago, Pete and I rolled up to their place unannounced. My mom answered the door, and we didn't give her a second to figure out what was happening before we barged in. My dad and Hannah were in the living room, and for a split second, it felt like old times until their faces dropped. My dad started hollering right off the bat, saying he'd call the law if we didn't hightail it out of his house. I fired back that he could do whatever he pleased, but not until he saw what we'd brought with us. My folks looked lost, but Hannah turned green, mumbling something about heading to her room. I figured she was trying to bolt, but there was no point. She wasn't getting out of this one. Pete pulled out the divorce papers and those email screenshots between Hannah and Frank, and I started laying out the real deal. My folks were still standing there, dumbfounded, while Hannah stayed quiet, probably hoping the floor would swallow her up. Pete didn't hold back. He told them how Hannah had to fork over our grandma's diamond ring in the divorce settlement because she couldn't cough up the cash. She's a high school teacher, not exactly rolling in dough, so she sold it off to square things with him. My parents were already reeling from what we'd said, and hearing about that ring, it was like pouring gas on a fire. We stood back and watched it all play out. My dad turned to Hannah, demanding she explain herself, but she just stammered, trying to spin more lies even with all that proof staring her in the face. He wasn't having it. He grabbed her stuff, shoved it into some bags, and told her to get out. Then he spun around and barked at all of us to clear out of his house. I didn't argue. Pete and I hightailed it while Hannah stood there, begging and crying for them to let her stay, sounding just like I did 7 years back when they'd done the same to me. It felt good, like the universe finally squared things up, and I couldn't have been happier to see it. That was a couple days ago. Then, out of nowhere, Hannah showed up at my place a few hours back, pounding on my door and telling me I had to fix things with our folks right then and there. I don't even know how she tracked me down, but I wasn't playing her game. I told her straight, I didn't know her a dang thing. She trashed my life once, so I paid her back, and now we were even. She must have been out of moves because she broke down sobbing, calling me a monster for what I'd done. I wasn't fazed by her waterworks. I shut the door in her face while she kept wailing outside. I popped on my headphones, cranked some tunes, and let Liza, my fiancée, keep working her study so we could both tune her out. After a while, Hannah gave up and left, but not before scrawling a note on my door with a marker, saying I was nothing but a spiteful jerk. I don't see it that way, not one bit, and I ain't sorry for what I did. She's dead set on painting me as the bad guy, but all I did was give her a taste of what she dished out to me years ago. Difference is, I stuck to the truth while she built her whole story on lies and dragged me down with it. So, I'm wondering, what do you all reckon about me turning the tables on Hannah, getting her kicked out 7 years after she blamed me for her divorce mess? Now, here's an update. Hannah's still on my case, even though it's been a week since she got the boot. She called me 14 times today alone, and I finally had to tell her I'd get the cops involved if she didn't knock it off. That shut her up, but I've got no idea how she even got my number or where I live. She's been laying it on thick, trying to guilt me into feeling bad for her, saying she can't make it on a teacher's paycheck. I ain't buying that. She's just mad she's got to pay her own way now, rent and groceries and all, since our parents cut her loose. I don't feel one lick of sorry for her. Oh, and yeah, I've blocked her number a bunch of times, but she keeps roping her friends into calling me on group chats, so it's pointless. Then there's my parents. They're just as bad, maybe worse. They sniffed me out on Facebook, saw that engagement post, and now they're acting like they want back in my life, even talking about coming to my wedding. They haven't said sorry or nothing, but they figure I'll just roll out the welcome mat for them on my big day. I can't wrap my head around where they get the nerve to pull that, but I'm not biting. Liza and I have been having a good laugh reading their messages. It's almost too pathetic to believe they're serious. They're in a sad spot, and that's on them. Then, yesterday, Hannah showed up again after I'd warned her about the cops. I was heading out to work when she threw herself across my car hood, refusing to move till I talked to her. It was a real pain, and I'd had enough. I called the police for real this time. They hauled her off, kicking and screaming, trying to make me look like the villain, but nobody was falling for her act. Took a bit to file the report, but once it was done, I headed to work, not letting her nonsense ruin my day. I figured my folks would bail her out since she's their favorite, and sure enough, they did. After that, they sent me this long-winded text, saying I was too hard on them for some honest mistake they made way back when. I laughed out loud. Nothing about what they did to me was honest or a mistake. They knew exactly how rotten they were being, tossing me out with nowhere to go, but that didn't stop them. So, after my parents bailed Hannah out, they hit me with that long text about me being too tough on them for what they called an honest slip-up from almost 10 years ago. I told them flat out they'd lost any say in my life 7 years back when they kicked me to the curb, and they'd better quit kidding themselves. I haven't blocked them yet, haven't had a spare minute to mess with my phone, but I'm planning to soon. Once that's done, I'll be free of this whole family for good, and I can't wait. Then, just today I got home from work and checked my social media. Sure enough, my folks had sent me another big old message. Liza and I sat down together to read it, and I swear it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. They don't even get that I'm not torn up over their words anymore. I'm just chuckling at how out of touch they are. They're still acting like we're some tight-knit crew, saying they've let Hannah move back in with them because both their kids deserve another shot. Like I was ever the one who messed up in the first place. They went on about wanting me and Liza to swing by their place soon for supper, figuring we could hash out our issues all nice and proper before the wedding. It's a hoot they think I'd even let them near my wedding day. We got a good laugh out of their ridiculous note, and then I fired back a reply. I told them I wasn't interested one bit in their dinner invite or anything else they had cooking. I've been doing just fine without them these past 7 years, and they showed me I'm better off on my own. I'll always be grateful they pushed me out. It proved I don't need them, and I sure don't want their fake forgiveness. They can keep playing their little family game with Hannah like they've been doing all along. With that, I hit send, blocked their numbers for good, and called it quits. I'm done with the laughs now. I'm over it and moving on. I'm betting they'll try to worm their way back into my life somehow, but tough luck for them. I ain't having it. Liza's all the family I need these days, and I'm happy as can be with just her by my side. My parents and Hannah have never been able to see past their own noses, and I doubt they ever will. Next time they come knocking, they'll be dealing with my lawyer too, and that's a promise I'm sticking to. That's where things stand now, me and Liza against the world, and I wouldn't have it any other way.